It's D-Day for impeached former President Park Geun-hye, and it will be broadcast live across the nation. Her sentencing on well over a dozen charges of corruption, bribery and abuse of power will complete a remarkable fall from grace. Another bumper quarter for Samsung Electronics. The South Korean tech giant says its first quarter operating profit was estimated at $14.7 billion. That's up more than 50% from the same period last year. Plus, Russia and Britain trade barbs at the UN Security Council over the UK's decision to point the finger at Moscow over the poisoning of a former Russian spy and his daughter. So it's a day that will go down in history. Just over a year ago, former President Park Geun-hye became the first leader in South Korean history to be impeached for her key role in a sprawling corruption and power abuse scandal that shook the country to its core. And today, the court will hand down its verdict on Park's case. Our Park Hee-jun is standing by in front of the Seoul Central District Court for us. So, Hee-jun, we still have a few hours to go to wait, but fill us in on what's happening over there.
Mark, there's tension both inside and outside the court. The demonstrations that we normally see outside Gwanghwamun appear to have assembled near the court today, and the sentencing won't begin until later this afternoon, and Park Geun-hye is expected not to show. But protests are starting to take shape, and thousands more are expected to gather throughout the day. Many of Park Geun-hye's supporters have camped overnight, and they lined up placards across the streets, demanding her release and even her reinstatement. Large-scale rallies will take place not just in front of the court, but also across the district. In case the demonstrations get violent, the police have mobilized around 4,000 men in the area, and entry to the court will be limited, especially through the main door.
Well, it seems like we are going to see huge crowds throughout the day outside the court there, and let's hope that it doesn't get violent. But what exactly is expected to happen to former President Park?
Well, Park faces 18 charges, including bribery, abuse of power, and leaking state secrets. If found guilty, she'll face up to 30 years in prison, which is pretty much for the rest of her life. Prosecutors demanded 30 years in prison and a fine of over $110 million for the former president. The court is likely to decide on a heavy sentence for Park, as it gave guilty verdicts to her accomplices, and many of their charges overlap with hers. In particular, 11 of Park's charges overlap with those of her confidant Choi Soon-sil, who was sentenced to 20 years in prison. For the first time in Korea's history, the sentencing of a former president will be broadcast live. Arirang News will also broadcast the sentencing, so our international viewers will be able to witness what becomes of the impeached president. Back to you, Mark.
Well, thank you, Hee-jun, for that report. And yes, we'll be bringing you live coverage of that sentencing trial coming up at around 2 p.m. Korea time, so in 4 hours or so from now. Now, from one corrupt former leader to another allegedly corrupt former leader. Prosecutors say they will indict former President Lee Myung-bak on Monday, a day before his 20-day detention period was set to expire. Lee's 12 charges include bribery, embezzlement and abuse of power. The former president has so far refused to cooperate with the prosecution's request to question him. Prosecutors say they can prove the ex-leader received around $11 million in bribes and embezzled even more through auto parts company Das, which he is suspected to secretly own. Lee's wife and son are also being investigated over suspicions that they also took kickbacks. Now, with the historic summit between South and North Korea to take place at the end of April, working-level officials from the two Koreas met on Thursday to thrash out the details on protocol, security and media coverage on the big day. Our Blue House correspondent Hwang Ho-jun with the details.
A serious and thorough discussion on ways to successfully hold the summit. Without sharing much else, That's how Blue House Press Center Director Kwon Hyuk-ki described the first working-level preparatory talks held in the border village of Panmunjeom on Thursday, ahead of the April 27th summit between Seoul and Pyongyang. Kwon was part of the 5-member delegation from South Korea. The team was led by the Deputy Director of the National Intelligence Service. The 6-member delegation from North Korea was headed by Kim Chang-sun, an official from Pyongyang State Affairs Commission. The meeting was to discuss security, protocol, and media coverage issues for the summit between South Korean President Moon Jae-in and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. The meeting kicked off in the morning on the South Korean side of the joint security area and lasted for hours without a lunch break. However, the Cheongwada Press Center chief said they had little to share about the meeting results due to security reasons. He emphasized details on the preparatory talks will not be disclosed until both sides reach a final agreement. The South Korean delegation says it will take more than one meeting for the two sides to work out the details. They need to agree on how the North Korean leader would arrive at the venue on the South Korean side of the inter-Korean border, whether he would cross the military demarcation line that bisects the Koreas by foot in a symbolic gesture. They also need to determine how many times the two leaders would meet on that day and whether parts of their meeting would be televised live. However, the South Korean delegation declined to answer how many more times they expect to meet with their North Korean counterparts before everything is settled, only adding the two sides agreed to meet for a second time but did not stipulate a specific date. Hwang Ho-jun, Arirang News.
Now, since the inter-Korean dialogue momentum began at the start of 2018, numerous rounds of talks have taken place at Panmunjeom, a village located on the inter-Korean border. It's known as the Truce village to many, as the two Koreas signed the Korean War Armistice Agreement there in the early 1950s. Our Oh Jung-hee reports.
A 250-kilometer-long military demarcation line cuts through the Korean peninsula, dividing it into South and North Korea. And along this line, there's a buffer zone called the Demilitarized Zone, or the DMZ, that stretches 2 kilometers north and south from the line. The village of Panmunjeom is in this zone, where the two Koreas signed an armistice agreement in 1953. A string of inter-Korean talks have taken place this year after more than 3 years of frosty relations. But the most important event is yet to take place. That's the third inter-Korean summit scheduled for April 27th at the Peace House located in the South Korean side of the border. Interest has been brewing over how North Korean leader Kim Jong-un will make his way to the meeting venue. It's almost certain that he'll be coming to the border village by car, but as he nears Panmunjeom building, the southernmost building in Panmunjeom, he could either choose to walk past the land border or continue driving. If North Korean leader Kim Jong-un is to walk towards the Peace House for the summit talks, then it is expected that he could be walking through the military demarcation line here. He'll become the first North Korean leader to step onto South Korean soil since the end of the Korean War in early 1950s. The fact that it was Kim Jong-un who proposed holding talks in the South Korean side is also eye-catching. The move is viewed as a strategy by the young Kim to stand out from his predecessors.
The past two inter-Korean summit talks were both held in Pyongyang, so the fact that the third inter-Korean summit talks are held at Panmunjeom, or to be specific at the Peace House in the South Korean side, holds great significance.
The border village of Panmunjeom is a symbol of a war that has not yet ended. But at the same time, it's also the place where the most reconciliatory moves between Seoul and Pyongyang are exchanged. Oh Jung-hee, Arirang News.
North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has reportedly told Chinese President Xi Jinping that he wants the long-stalled six-party talks on North Korea's denuclearization to resume. Quoting multiple sources with links to Pyongyang and Beijing, the Japanese daily Nikkei Shimbun reports that Kim made the remarks during his surprise visit to Beijing last week. The six-party talks involve the two Koreas, the US, Russia, China and Japan, but they haven't been held since late 2008. Chinese officials were not available to comment on the report. And North Korea's top diplomat has expressed optimism over the recent thawing of relations between Seoul and Pyongyang as they head toward their big inter-Korean summit in 3 weeks' time. For more on the diplomatic push for peace on the Korean Peninsula, Lee Seung-jae reports.
Delivering a speech at a conference of the non-aligned movement in Baku, Azerbaijan on Thursday, North Korean Foreign Minister Lee Myung-bak said the Korean Peninsula is relishing the atmosphere of reconciliation and trust between the two Koreas. While Lee credited North Korean leader Kim Jong-un for his role in thawing inter-Korean ties, he also cited the formation of a joint Korean women's ice hockey team during the Pyeongchang Winter Olympics in February as an example of the reconciliatory atmosphere. Lee said he felt optimistic that peace can come to the Korean Peninsula, adding that the two Koreas may achieve a breakthrough by uniting their efforts. He added that the actions of great countries come with responsibilities, a statement apparently urging the United States to exercise restraint so as not to adversely affect the warming atmosphere on the peninsula. Lee will be heading to Turkmenistan next, followed by Russia, where he's scheduled to meet his Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov amid a flurry of diplomacy ahead of the inter-Korean summit scheduled for April 27th. Lee's remarks in Azerbaijan on Thursday came as Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi held talks with Lavrov in Moscow. Wang said Beijing wants to see the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula as it's the path to long-term peace and stability. He added that China and Russia welcome and support the notable improvement in the situation and appreciate the efforts made by the two Koreas. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Now, in other news, Samsung Electronics is projecting another record operating profit for the first quarter of 2018 after last year's stellar performance. The South Korean tech giant said on Friday its estimated operating profit for the first 3 months of this year hit $14.7 billion. That is up more than 57% from the same period last year, beating market forecasts as demand for its memory chips remained strong. Sales revenue is estimated to have increased nearly 19% on year to $56.7 billion. Samsung will provide net income and divisional performance when it releases the final results later this month. US President Donald Trump has urged his trade representative to consider an additional $100 billion of tariffs against China. Trump's newly proposed tariffs include products used for information and communication technology, areas in which he feels China is stealing US intellectual property. The US Trade Representative emphasized that any additional tariffs would only be implemented after they undergo a public comment process. China on Wednesday announced it would introduce tariffs on more than 100 American products, including cars and whiskey, in retaliation against the Trump administration's first round of tariffs. The Moon Jae-in administration's multi-billion-dollar supplementary budget to reduce the nation's stubbornly high youth unemployment rate will head to the National Assembly today for their review. It's the second extra budget since the start of the less than 1 year old Moon Jae-in administration that is solely for the purpose of creating more jobs. Kim Hae-sung reports.
The government has proposed a supplementary budget worth about $3.7 billion, which will be submitted to the National Assembly Friday for approval. The extra spending is aimed at tackling South Korea's high youth unemployment, which the government sees as a developing crisis, and at helping regional economies hit by corporate restructuring. The government's goal is to bring youth unemployment down to below 8% by 2021 from last year's 9.8% and to create around 50,000 jobs for young people. Of the total extra budget, $2.75 billion are to be used to support small and mid-sized companies that hire new full-time employees and to subsidize their wages. There are also tax incentives for new workers and for smaller-sized firms that hire them. The Finance Ministry said the remaining $950 million will go to domestic automobile and shipbuilding companies in the restructuring process. If passed, this would be the second extra budget under President Moon Jae-in. Last year, the Moon administration formed a $10.5 billion supplementary budget to create more quality jobs. South Korea has passed extra budgets every year since 2015. The latest proposal, worth $3.7 billion, would be the smallest one since 2006. But there is no guarantee this one will pass the National Assembly. Opposition lawmakers are against it, and the ruling Democratic Party holds just 41% of the body's 293 seats. Kim Hae-sung, Arirang News.
One pilot has been confirmed dead and another is presumed dead after their F-15K fighter jet crashed into the side of a mountain on Thursday close to the southeastern city of Daegu. The Air Force says the jet slammed into the mountain at 2:38 p.m. local time in Chilgok, Gyeongsang-buk-do province, while on its way back to Daegu Air Base after an hour-long training mission. The two airmen have been identified as a captain and a first lieutenant, both in their 20s. No civilians were injured in the crash. The Air Force is searching for the body of the missing pilot and has launched a full probe into the cause of the accident. Now, 2 months after South Korea allowed terminally ill patients to choose to die with dignity, more than 3,200 patients have decided to halt their medical treatment. According to government data, of the total, over 2,000 have signed up to forego meaningless extension of life by refusing life-sustaining treatments, while over 1,000 have already halted all their treatments. The 4 treatments in the law are cardiopulmonary resuscitation, artificial ventilation, hemodialysis and anti-cancer drug administration. In 2009, the Supreme Court recognized a comatose patient's right to die with dignity and ordered a hospital to remove her respirator, noting that continued treatment without hope of recovery violates an individual's basic dignity. Now for a look at stories making headlines around the world, and we're going to start today in Japan. Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, already reeling from a cronyism scandal, is facing further criticism over an alleged cover-up of documents relating to troops his country sent to Iraq over a decade ago. For more on this and other international news, let's turn to our Noah Aram. So Aram, there have been protests calling for Abe to step down, and now he is facing yet another political headache.
That's right, Mark. On Wednesday, Defence Minister Itsunori Onodera said the army last year found activity logs from a controversial 2004 to 2006 deployment to Iraq, but failed to report them to his predecessor, Tomomi Inada. Inada had told Parliament early last year that the documents could not be found, but it turned out they were actually in the Self-Defense Forces' possession at the time. Inada was being grilled by lawmakers over a mishandling of another set of records related to the Japanese Army's peacekeeping mission in South Sudan. That scandal forced Inada to resign last July. The failure to disclose the Iraq records has again raised suspicions of a cover-up by the Abe government to avoid further controversy about the deployment. Between 2004 and 2006, thousands of Japanese troops were sent to Iraq for what the army called reconstruction and humanitarian activities. It insisted the mission took place in a non-conflict zone to avoid violating Japan's pacifist constitution. But experts believe the area was a conflict zone, stirring debate in Japan about whether the country took part in a war or not. The undisclosed activity logs could have shed light on the conditions in the area at the time. The head of Japan's SDF, meanwhile, issued an apology on Thursday for the delay in the reporting of the records, reassuring the public that the SDF remains under civilian control. The issue is another headache for Abe, who is already embroiled in multiple scandals and suffering from poor approval ratings. Civic groups also gathered outside Japan's Diet on Thursday, demanding Abe's resignation. If the poor ratings continue, then his chances of winning a third term as leader of the ruling Liberal Democratic Party in a September vote looks very slim. The daughter of a former Russian spy, both of whom were poisoned by a nerve agent in England last month, has spoken out for the first time since regaining consciousness over a week ago. London police released a statement on Yulia Skripal's behalf on Thursday in which she was quoted as saying her strength is growing daily. She says she was grateful for the many messages of goodwill she had received and also thanked those who came to her aid. She added that the whole ordeal has been somewhat disorientating and asked the public to respect the privacy of her and her family. Her father, Sergei Skripal, however, remains in critical condition. The poisoning has led to a spiralling diplomatic dispute between the UK and Russia. At a UN Security Council meeting on Thursday, Russia's envoy blasted the UK for accusing Moscow of the attack, warning the UK that it was, quote, playing with fire. A 5.3 magnitude earthquake has struck near the Channel Islands in Southern California. Thursday's quake did cause some buildings to shake in the Los Angeles area, but there were no immediate reports of damage or injuries. It was centered just south of Santa Cruz Island, and it struck at a depth of about 117 kilometers. A German court has agreed to release former Catalan President Carlos Puigdemont on bail while extradition proceedings continue. He was arrested upon entering Germany last month on a Spanish-issued warrant while he was heading to Belgium, where he is living in self-imposed exile. He's wanted on charges of sedition, rebellion and misappropriation of public funds in Spain after Catalonia's banned independence referendum last year. The court on Thursday ruled his extradition to Spain was possible on the basis of corruption charges, but not on the more serious charge of rebellion.
Well, thank you very much, as always, to Ano Aram for the world news there. Now, our weathercaster, Lee Ji-hyun, is here, but she's actually at a famous mountain in Seoul, surrounded by some of the nice spring flowers that we can see behind her. So let's go straight over there. Ji-hyun, we had rain and chillier conditions over the past couple of days. We all hope that the weather improves for the weekend, of course. How are things looking? And more importantly, have the showers cleared all that awful fine dust from the air?
Hello and good morning, Mark. Well, first of all, it was one very chilly and gray morning earlier, but the fresh scent of morning in spring was very nice here at Eungbongsan Mountain. And to get back to Mark's question, right now we're breathing in normal to good air quality across much of the country, but the fine dust levels will rise as we head into the afternoon. But if you're surrounded by the nature, trees, flowers, and grasses, that can actually lower the amount of fine dust particles. So why don't you come on out to Eungbongsan Mountain? In fact, they're going to have their own Forsythia Festival starting today, running into Sunday. Various programs are well underway, so come on out with your friends and families. And as for the weather conditions, you'll need to dress warmly for next couple of days. It's a chilly Friday for here in Seoul and across much of the country. Beijing is also quite chilly and Tokyo will be quite windy. Lower than average temperatures are expected into the weekend, so you might want to take out your favorite winter jacket and wear it for the one last time, just like myself. And there will be partly sunny skies for the time being. Skies are getting brighter here in Seoul, but again, beware of high levels of fine dust and check the levels before heading out. And for today's daily highs, here in Seoul will be a couple notches higher than Thursday, topping out at 11 degrees Celsius. Daegu will be a lot milder than yesterday, getting up to 16 degrees. Gyeongju will get up to 15 degrees this afternoon. Well, the spring festivals will also kick off in the capital area this weekend, but there will be road closures here and there, so you might want to check out the traffic conditions beforehand. That's Korea for you, and here's international weather for viewers around the world.
Well, that's where we're going to leave it for now on this Friday morning here in Seoul. Our next bulletin is coming up at noon Korea time in around an hour and a half from now. So until then, goodbye.